So Judge Juan Merchan delaying former President Donald Trump's sentencing in his New York case until after the election, saying he wanted to avoid any suggestions that he would be giving either candidate an advantage or disadvantage. Of course not. Well, what does my next guest make of this move to former federal prosecutor Katie Cherkasky? Forgive the sarcasm on my part, but it's kind of, when you look at the way this judge dealt inside the courtroom, it's hard to suggest that he was completely impartial, isn't it?
Well, of course, there's no evidence that he has been very fair to President Trump throughout this process. And his decision to delay the sentencing is not some sort of gift to President Trump, although it does benefit him. In reality, the case has so many legal hurdles to still be adjudicated that there was no possible way the sentencing could proceed. Even DA Bragg's office essentially agreed with that, because if he had proceeded with that before ruling on how the Supreme Court's immunity decision impacted that case, it would have been reversed immediately.
Well, you hit on it. I mean, I think the decision had less to do with his concerns about the election coming up than it did with the Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity. Isn't that true?
That's exactly right. The immunity decision essentially says that certain evidence and certain acts cannot be used in a prosecution of a former president. Now, when that case was tried, that immunity decision had not come down yet. So Judge Merchan now has to do an analysis of whether this case can even stand. And there's a good argument, I think, that the case could be reversed in total because there was testimony that was taken, particularly from Hope Hicks, and potentially some other evidence that was admitted that tainted the entire proceeding. So the reality is that this case needs a lot of appellate review, probably including the Supreme Court's own analysis, before it could even possibly continue if it's not reversed entirely.
And by the way, Hope Hicks' testimony, not only did she make it, stuff that was happening in the Oval Office, which Supreme Court suggested might be immune from even being brought up in a courtroom in any case, but the prosecution making their final points in the case emphasized what was happening in the Oval Office. So that seems to directly conflict with the Supreme Court ruling, right?
Well, there are a significant amount of concerns about what went on in that case. And there's other significantly reversible error that occurred. But you're right. In terms of the immunity decision, we do not know exactly how that will be interpreted by the higher appellate courts and whether these cases can even stand at all if there was impermissible evidence that was admitted, or whether they can say that the outcome would have been the same without that evidence in the first place. That's highly dubious to me. I think that the proceedings are irreparably tainted, and this case probably will be reversed entirely on appeal once it gets through that process, even just on that basis. All
right. Well, meanwhile, there's another case that's been in the news, and that's Hunter Biden making the quick decision after going through all this mess with the courtroom to plead guilty to these tax charges. What's the latest on that? And do you think that we will get a pardon, notwithstanding the comments of the president in the past saying he wouldn't offer one?
Well, Hunter Biden faces a significant sentence, and there's almost no chance that he is not adjudged at least some amount of jail time. I don't know if the Oval Office is waiting to see whether he gets a very light sentence, and then they could allow him to serve it in some showing that this was truly a fair process here. But I would be surprised if there's not a pardon or a commutation issued if he does face a very significant jail sentence. He is not a first-time offender. That's going to be used against him significantly in the sentencing here. And he had no plea deal. So his plea of guilty was essentially just a full guilty plea with the maximum sentences available on all of those charges. So he has a lot of exposure here. President Biden's promises are not binding, and I would be surprised if he didn't commute the sentence at the very least. And very quickly, all of the Hunter watchers out there on the conservative side are saying, shucks, because we were hoping there, in the process of discovery, there'd be all this other stuff about whether or not Joe Biden was dealing at all with his sons and brother's business. So that stuff we'll have to wait and go to congressional committees if they still want to investigate it, right? Absolutely. I think it was pretty clear that there was going to be significantly damning and embarrassing information, at the very least, about the Biden family, about their financial dealings in particular. So that likely motivated Hunter's last-minute plea, although I don't know why it didn't come sooner. He knew that all along. It's a good question. I'm sure the court wants to know that instead of having spent about $3 billion on it. Katie, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Well, Charlie Gasparino coming up on
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.